This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Natalie Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. China's defense minister calls for global unity against a divided world ruled by the strong, while also renewing threats against Taiwanese independence by, quote, separatists. A Chinese tech giant Huawei makes a leap in chip development, unveiling its latest hardware packing more AI computing firepower, essentially bypassing advanced semiconductors made by industry titan Nvidia. Now, sirens rang out in northeast China to mark 94 years since the Manchurian Incident, a military operation that was used as pretext for Japan's invasion and subsequent occupation. And South Korea says the North has revealed a new intercontinental ballistic missile that's still in development, a move Seoul believes is intended to pile pressure on the U.S. Also on the bulletin, a veteran Japanese lawmaker throws her hat into the ring for the ruling LDP's leadership race, once again seeking to become the country's first female prime minister. And going bananas for sustainability. A Taiwanese entrepreneur is hoping to transform fibers from the plant into textiles that would go into making wearables. China's Defense Minister Dong Jun has called on countries to stand against hegemonic logic and bullying acts in a Defense Forum speech laced with veiled swipes at the United States. Now, he told the Xiangshan Forum in Beijing that the Chinese military stands ready to work with all parties as a force for global peace and stability. CNA's Tan Sihui with this report.
There was no direct reference to the U.S. in his half-hour-long speech at the Xiangshan Forum. But the message was clear. Chinese Defense Minister Dong Jun warned of new threats to world peace, adding that the world is overshadowed by Cold War mentality, hegemonism, and protectionism, subtle yet familiar language used to criticize the U.S. amid persistent tensions.
越是直面战争与和平的考题和 血与火的考验，越需要我们铭记历史，坚守正道，团结合作。
The reference to history comes as the three-day gathering coincides with a key World War II anniversary for China. It views September 18 as the start of Japan's invasion in 1931. Also, just 2 weeks after a grand military parade was held to mark 80 years since the end of the World War. Mr. Dong echoing calls by Chinese President Xi Jinping to defend the post-war order, adding that Taiwan is an integral part of this.
台湾属于中国的历史和法理事实，不容置疑。中国人民解放军始终是 捍卫祖国统一、无坚不摧的强大力量，绝不允许任何台独分裂图谋得逞。我们随时准备着挫败任何外部的武力干涉。
Mr. Dong also hit out at freedom of navigation operations by certain countries in the disputed South China Sea.
需要我们警惕的是，盲目的强调这个急，在军事实力上的绝对优势，信奉实力就等于权力，必然导致 一个无序的多极化，丛林的多极化。
Mr. Dong said China was committed to peaceful development, noting the growing strength of the global South.
中国人民军队越强大，制约战争的力量就会越壮大，世界和平与发展就会越有保障。 军事结盟和集团政治都是为霸权 谋私利的小圈子。中国奉行的是不结盟的政策，敞开怀抱，广交朋友，与各方构建新型的安全伙伴关系。
But Mr. Dong also cited growing challenges due to a lack of international rules, especially in emerging areas like AI and the deep sea, calling on countries to fill the gap. Over 1,800 representatives from more than 100 countries are attending this year's Xiangshan Forum, sometimes called China's answer to the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore. Many attendees are from the global south, and while Mr. Dong's American counterpart Pete Hegseth is not present, analysts note the two defense chiefs spoke over video call last week, showing communication channels are still open despite tensions. Tan Si-hui, CNA, Beijing.
Now, earlier we spoke with Chong Jia-in, Associate Professor of Political Science at the National University of Singapore and non-resident scholar at Carnegie, China. And he shared his insights on whether Mr. Dong's speech offered new clues on Beijing's military posture in the region.
Where I think Dong Jun's speech was fairly interesting to me was when he talked about the need for sort of regional and region-led solutions, right? So in contrast with this call for unity, he's essentially saying that there should be a sort of prioritization on regional actors. And so other actors that might have interests in the South China Sea, in Taiwan, should basically stay out. And that also, I think, is interesting when he brings in this idea of multipolarity, which is different from multilateralism. Multipolarity historically means you have big powers, they carve out areas of the world which they're dominant. So there's a certain tension in Dong Jun's comments.
Now, it's been reported as well that foreign delegates view this Xiangshan Forum as an opportunity to get insights into China's new weapons systems. How significant is this aspect of soft disclosure in shaping perceptions of Chinese military capabilities?
So events like the Xiangshan, and also before that, the parade for commemorating the end of the Second World War, these showcase Chinese capabilities. They are managed in such a way to emphasize PRC's strength. They are done in such a way to discourage others from perhaps taking up arms or challenging the PRC. So there is messaging in there to the extent that you can read things like decision-making, things like actual operational capability. That's a lot more difficult. So, I guess people go there to get glimpse, but they will probably, look at what they see with a perhaps big pinch of salt.
And Professor, as we know, Dong Jun skipped the Shangri-La Dialogue earlier this year in Singapore, but of course he made a high-profile appearance at Xiangshan with that big speech this morning. What does this say about Beijing's approach to shaping regional security discourse on its own terms?
Right, so this is something that has been in the atmosphere, in the water for some time. Sorry for mixing the metaphors, but essentially the PRC wants to put its own imprint on how it pushes for security dialogues and security arrangements. And Dong's absence at the Shangri-La and his presence at the Xiangshan, it's really a continued emphasis on China wanting to host things and run things on their own terms. And in that regard, Shangri-La, perhaps in their eyes, is a little bit less important than, their own sort of home court when it comes to the Xiangshan Forum.
And there's speculation about the commissioning of the Fujian aircraft carrier as well. What does this timing of this forum and then China's broader military messaging tell us about the country's naval strategy?
So the Fujian had been on trials for a while. I suppose when all the sort of checks and tests are done, they can commission it. After that, there'll still be some more tests. But I suppose the timing, the attention, if it so happens, draws attention to the fact that the PRC is a big naval power, that it can project a naval capability. Now, that sort of idea of dominance, of presence, is something that Beijing would like to emphasize. The downside of that, though, is that it could cause a degree of alarm and a degree of concern among the PRC's neighbors, notably Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines. And they could then take steps to try to counter that. Could get us into a little bit of a security spiral.
And we're going to keep the conversation into China's military developments going. We'll be chatting with Zhou Bo later this hour. He's a senior fellow at the Center for International Security and Strategy at Tsinghua University. Now, also in China, Huawei has unveiled its AI hardware, claiming that it would be the world's most powerful by computing power for several years. And Henry is standing by to tell us a bit more about that.
Yes, indeed, Oteli. And the Atlas 950 supercluster, as it's called, uses local chip technology and looks to directly challenge Nvidia's presence in the country. The move could mark a potential breakthrough for China's AI ambitions. I will have more details on this in just a bit. Stay tuned.
Meantime, China is commemorating the anniversary of the Manchurian Incident, which led to Japan's invasion during World War II. A bell tolled and air raid sirens rang out across China's northeastern Liaoning province to mark this day in 1931, when Japanese troops blew up a section of the South Manchurian Railway that it controlled as a pretext to attack China. Now, new film Evil Unbound opened today in theaters across China today to coincide with commemorative events. Pre-sales for the movie surpassed $14 million, which showed the atrocities committed by Japan's germ warfare unit 731 during World War II. Now, in the lead up to China's World War II commemorations, Japan has warned its nationals in the country against growing anti-Japanese sentiment. Just last month, a Japanese woman was assaulted while walking with her child at a subway station in eastern China's Suzhou city. Another Japanese mother and child pair was also injured in the same city in June last year. We're going to go for a short break now, but coming up on East Asia tonight, a tactical shift by Beijing. Authorities drop an antitrust probe into Google as regulatory focus pivots to Nvidia. Hello again. You're watching East Asia tonight, and Henry is right here to walk us through some of the big story of the day, starting with Huawei's AI computing breakthrough. So, Henry, Huawei's chip advance could apparently also empower China's AI ambitions to possibly wean itself off foreign tech. How true is that?
Yes, Oteli. So we'll tell you more about that. So Huawei says its new hardware could deliver world-class computing power without using Nvidia's advanced chips. The Shenzhen-based telecommunications equipment giant says it has developed a world's most powerful supernode computing cluster using local chip-making processes, which can link thousands of its chips together, giving systems much greater computing power. It's also rolling out new variants of its Ascent AI chip. Next year, it will launch the Ascent 950, and in 2027, the 960, followed by 970 in 2028. The chip will be powered by the firm's own high-bandwidth memory. And for more details, we're joined by CNA senior correspondent Dan Yuguan, live from Shanghai. Yuguan, so just how significant is Huawei's latest announcement?
Well, it's definitely a milestone for China. Huawei's Ascend processors are NPUs, or neural processing units, designed specifically for artificial intelligence. Unlike general-purpose chips, NPUs are optimized for heavy math behind AI training and inference. Huawei also introduced supercomputers that can connect hundreds of thousands, even up to 1 million of these NPUs. For China's tech sector, this matters because U.S. sanctions have cut off access to Nvidia's most advanced chips. But these supercomputers can string together less advanced chips in a viable way to give you comparable computing power. Huawei's roadmap now gives China a long-term domestic supply of AI hardware. Henry?
So, Yuguan, what threats does it pose to Western chip firms, especially Nvidia? Can we expect Huawei, to dominate the chip-making industry, potentially replacing Nvidia?
Well, the main threat is really to Nvidia's business in China. The company can only sell export-compliant chips here, such as the H2O or the RTX Pro 6000D, which are deliberately restricted with slower memory and reduced bandwidth. Huawei's chips don't face those limits. They could outperform Nvidia's China-only models and undercut them on costs. But globally, Huawei won't replace Nvidia because Nvidia still has the fastest GPU and a critical advantage with its CUDA software ecosystem, which most AI developers rely on. So Huawei could dominate inside China, but Nvidia remains the leader worldwide. We must bear in mind, however, that the size of the market in China is quite sizable for these chips. By dominating the market, Huawei could be able to secure more money through its hardware sales to accelerate its R&D. Henry?
Well, Yeo Guan, how might this affect the ongoing US-China trade negotiations?
It adds another layer of complexity to reading the dynamics of those talks. For Beijing, Huawei's progress shows that it can press ahead despite sanctions and that strengthens China's bargaining position. For Washington, it highlights the limits of the export controls. At the same time, US firms like Nvidia are losing access to one of their biggest markets, which is why Nvidia and other chip makers are lobbying Washington to ease some of those export rules. They argue that, current controls mainly hurt US companies while pushing China to build its own alternatives. So in the future, we might see Washington softening its position. But it might be too late because for China, they already learned that they cannot rely on Western technology. And however, the same is true for China's restrictions on rare earths. At some point, they will lose that bargaining chip as well, with the US also developing its own sources. However, the implications of this go way beyond just the US and China. For the rest of us, we could find ourselves trying to navigate between two separate and increasingly divergent technological ecosystems. That means companies outside the US and China may face tougher choices over which side to align with and how to keep access to both. Henry?
Well, Yeo Guan, thank you so much for your report. CNA's Dan Yeo Guan live from Shanghai. Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang says Washington and Beijing have larger agendas to work out as the tech giant is caught in the intensifying competition between the two countries. Mr. Huang was asked in London about a Financial Times report saying China's internet regulator ordered top tech firms to stop buying Nvidia's AI chips and cancel existing orders. Some of these named companies reportedly include TikTok parent ByteDance and e-commerce giant Alibaba. He said he was disappointed about the directive, but that he will remain patient while the two countries iron out their issues. He added that Nvidia can only be in service if a country wants them to be. Nvidia has been navigating tensions between the US and China as it tries to meet growing demand for their AI chips. Shares of the company fell 2.6% overnight on Wall Street. China is reportedly ending an antitrust probe into Google. That's as trade talks between Beijing and Washington intensify over TikTok and Nvidia amid rising tensions between the two countries. Financial Times reports that while authorities are easing their stance on the internet giant, they are instead focusing on Nvidia, the maker of chips vital to AI training and operation. Experts say the move can be seen as a tactical recalibration by Beijing seeking to use Nvidia as a point of leverage in trade talks. At the same time, terminating Google investigation sends a positive signal to Washington that Beijing can be flexible in negotiations. The US and China wrapped up 3 days of trade talks in Madrid this week, their fourth round of negotiations after earlier meetings in Geneva, London, and Stockholm. President Donald Trump is set to speak with Chinese President Xi Jinping tomorrow, where he's expected to finalize a deal on TikTok. Meantime, Google has not been formally notified of the decision to drop the probe. So a lot of tech ground to cover here, from Chinese scrutiny of US firms to advances with Huawei. Let's bring in Felix Lee of Morningstar to help us get some perspective. So Felix, Huawei is reportedly bundling thousands of chips together to rival Nvidia's computing power. That's a very different approach in the AI race. But is this really a technological breakthrough that gives China a clear edge over its Western rivals, or just a temporary workaround?
Okay, so this superport technology is actually an answer to Nvidia's NVLink technology. So the superport and NVLink technologies is what they say. They link chips together into a single backbone so that they can function as a single, they seem to function as a single chip. So that is effectively pooling all together, hundreds and thousands of chips in order to maximize their performance. So we think this is an answer to competition, but not exactly something that could uniquely pull Huawei in front of Nvidia or any of its competition.
Mm-hmm. Well, Felix, according to the Financial Times report, and Chinese regulators are urging local tech firms to cut their reliance on Nvidia. So has the moment truly arrived for China to say, we can live without you, Nvidia, or is that still more aspirational than practical?
Well, there are a few ways to look at this. The first way is from the geopolitical side, because the U.S. somewhat needs China as a revenue source to power future R&D roadmaps, while China also needs the best chips, as good as possible chips to roll out more and more AI applications. So it's kind of an equal footing regarding these two countries. On the fundamental side, I would say having these chips would be instrumental for both countries, because China is still having some manufacturing gaps with international leaders like TSMC. So it's not something, I think right now it's still a bit aspirational, but the long-term 5 to 10 year outlook is to really have their self-sufficiency in China.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've seen Beijing drop its antitrust probe into Google while doubling down on Nvidia in the middle of sensitive trade talks. So what's the strategy here? Why single out Nvidia? And what message is Beijing trying to send to Washington?
It's really about getting leverage. So Google has been unavailable in China for at least a decade. And also Google does have some revenue in China via some search-related advertisements, but Nvidia is definitely the bigger lever to pull, potentially, because before any of these chip-related bans, Nvidia has around 15 to 20% revenue in China. So that is a very significant market for Nvidia or any chip company. So depriving Nvidia of any such revenue could potentially be, it could affect the stock performance of Nvidia, and it could also have a broader impact on semiconductor R&D due to the revenue, profit, and research cycles.
Mm-hmm. Well, Felix, let's circle back to the point that you mentioned about self-sufficiency. We are still facing many problems such as, bottlenecks in advanced chip making and increasingly fragmented supply chain. So it seems like a full self-sufficiency looks pretty elusive at the moment. So realistically, how can China carve out a lasting advantage in this global AI competition?
Right. So there are several ways to look at it. I'll delve into two parts. So the first part is advanced manufacturing. So SMIC has been producing 7 nanometer or equivalent chips in its mass production phase. And we expect, SMIC to have 5 nanometer or equivalent chips in the coming years. That would prove quite sufficient for day-to-day AI usage. The other part is to break through on the equipment side. So there are hundreds of types of equipment in the semiconductor supply chain, and we would expect, China would incubate a lot of these companies, both listed and non-listed companies, to each engage in some niches. So some niches would require a longer development time, and some would require a shorter period. But all in all, the trend has been to debottleneck a lot of these equipment deficiencies one by one, so that we would see, at least a partial self-sufficiency in 5 years' time. And we think, if as we look even further ahead, it is more likely for China to be self-sufficient.
All right, Felix, thank you so much for your insights. Felix Lee, Senior Equity Analyst with Morningstar. And that's all for business. Back to you, Oteli.
Right, we're going to go for another break now, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, China urging dialogue over confrontation at the country's largest annual security gathering. We'll delve into Beijing's defense strategy with a former senior colonel from the Chinese People's Liberation Army after the break. And Taiwan's defense spending spree draws more foreign firms to its largest weapons show. Hello there, this is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Huawei unveils new hardware that it says could deliver world-class AI computing power without relying on advanced chips of American tech giant Nvidia. China commemorates the anniversary of the Manchurian Incident, which led to Japan's invasion during World War II. China's defense minister urges global unity against an increasingly divided world, defined by what he calls the law of the jungle. And for more insights, we are now joined by Zhou Bo, a senior fellow at the Center for International Security and Strategy in Tsinghua University. And he is also a retired senior colonel of China's People's Liberation Army. Well, thanks, Mr. Zhou, for joining us on East Asia Tonight. First up, I just thought we'd just get the big picture question out of the way, and that is, generally, what was the tone that you got from Dong Jun? How different is it from last year? Any deliberate shift, maybe in its reference towards the U.S.?
Well, I would rather argue that although he spent quite some time to talk about the war against the Japanese invasion, he actually led unprecedented stress on the Taiwan issue, given that the background has somehow changed with the Taiwanese leader, Lai Ching-te, being really provocative. The second thing is I have taken notice.
Mr. Zhou, I'm afraid we have lost contact with Mr. Zhou. Might have been some audio issues there. But when we can, as possible, we'll try and get Mr. Zhou back with our conversation. Now, let's turn our attention to other news now, where Singapore Defense Minister Chan Chun Sing, he was among the officials attending the Xiangshan Forum in the Chinese capital. Well, he says that recent comments from the defense leaders of US and China have given confidence that the world is big enough for all countries to prosper, progress, and learn on equal footing. Now, he referenced US Secretary of War Pete Hegseth's call with Chinese Defense Minister Dong Jun last week, which has been described as candid and constructive.
As we adapt to a transition in the global order, there is a historical opportunity for all great powers to exercise their leadership to win the world. Doing so will require magnanimity and a shared commitment to maintain harmony. Likewise, there is an opportunity for all small countries like Singapore to contribute to global stability by taking the side of principles and not power. All of us have a choice to make. All of us can make a choice to safeguard a better life for future generations.
For Pakistan, a close ally of China and Saudi Arabia have signed a mutual defense pact, which states that any aggression against either nation would be considered an attack on both. Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman reinforcing their commitment during Mr. Sharif's state visit to Riyadh. The two leaders issued a joint statement to deepen cooperation that are based on, quote, historic partnership and shared strategic interests. Riyadh and nuclear-armed Islamabad share a close relationship stretching all the way back to decades. Now, efforts to boost defense ties come in the wake of Israel's attack on Qatar last week, which raised regional concerns among Gulf states. Meantime, India said it is aware of the deal and that it would monitor the implications on its national security. Taiwan's largest arms fair, the Taipei Aerospace and Defense Technology Exhibition, is drawing more foreign firms this year. Now, the event features nearly 500 exhibitors, twice the number from when it was last held in 2023, as Taiwan seeks to boost its defense spending to 5% of its GDP by 2030, amid growing pressure from China. And more than 40 of the firms are from the U.S., the island's most important arms supplier.
What we do is this year is that we provide both surveillance radar, a lot of sensors, and also a fire control radar to allow the armored vehicle to fire a traditional weapon against a drone in a closed loop.
Regarding drones, there is a very quick development first. There's not that much business, but the development is going so fast, particularly in this segment. And of course, Taiwan and speed of development is quite famous.
Coming up in East Asia tonight, South Korea reportedly investigating whether Russia supplied key nuclear technology for North Korea's submarines. South Korea says Pyongyang may have revealed the development of a new intercontinental ballistic missile earlier than planned. Well, Seoul believes it could be a bid to apply pressure on the U.S., a country North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has once called its biggest enemy. A South Korean military official says the North's newest ICBM, the Hwasong-20, appears to be in the early stages of development, and that Pyongyang's revealing of the weapon could be due to political factors. A North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, paid a visit to a research center earlier this month that's developing a new solid-fuel engine for use by the Hwasong-20. A ground test for the missile's engine was also conducted during the leader's visit that revealed what appears to be the new ICBM's warhead. Analysts say North Korea may display or carry out a test fire of the new long-range weapon around a major anniversary the country is set to mark next month. Seoul is also reportedly investigating whether Russia secretly shipped nuclear submarine reactor modules to North Korea. Unnamed government sources told local media that South Korea's military had obtained intelligence suggesting that Moscow supplied Pyongyang with 2 to 3 small modular reactors earlier this year, with all the core components for a nuclear propulsion unit. Now, the technology could fast-track Pyongyang's quest for an atomic-powered fleet, enabling its submarines to remain underwater for months and launch missiles while staying largely undetected. Any military shipment will violate multiple UN sanctions and fuel calls for tougher measures against both Russia and North Korea. Seoul and Washington say that they will respond decisively if the intelligence proves true. Now, North Korea first announced plans for a nuclear-powered submarine back in 2021, when experts doubt it had the expertise to build a compact naval reactor. A ready-made Russian module could slash Pyongyang's attempts to develop the tech from years to mere months. Satellite images show leader North Korean Kim Jong-un inspecting a new submarine hull at the Sinpo shipyard in March, hinting that a prototype could be moving forward. South Korean prosecutors are seeking an arrest warrant for Unification Church leader Han Hak-ja, citing risks of evidence tampering. The move comes a day after Han was questioned for 9.5 hours as part of a criminal probe into the ousted President Yoon Suk-yeol and his wife, former First Lady Kim Hyun-hee. The religious leader is facing allegations of bribery linking Kim. She allegedly accepted luxury gifts from Han, including a designer handbag and diamond necklace, in exchange for favors. Han has denied those claims. The Unification Church criticized the attempt to arrest Han, insisting she does not pose a flight risk, as it stressed that there is a lack of clear evidence from the authorities. Now, the probe into South Korea's former First Lady is just one of 3 special prosecutor investigations launched under the new government. Kim has been arrested and indicted on charges of bribery and stock market manipulation, while her husband, also in custody, will be standing trial over his declaration of martial law. A Japanese veteran lawmaker, Sanae Takaichi, has announced her candidacy to become the next leader of the country's ruling Liberal Democratic Party. Well, she's hoping to become Japan's first female helming the top job. The lawmaker ran for LDP's leadership race last year, but was narrowly defeated by now outgoing Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba. Well, Ms. Takaichi is known to be a China critic and a vocal advocate of government stimulus and monetary easing, sharing the same hawkish stance as late former leader Shinzo Abe. She had served as a Minister for Economic Security from 2022 to last year, as well as under the Internal Affairs Ministry from 2019 to 2020. An early opinion poll by Kyodo News places Takaichi as frontrunner in the race, along with Farm Minister Shinjiro Koizumi. The election follows the resignation of Mr. Ishiba this month after the party's failure to retain control of both the upper and lower houses of parliament. LDP members of the National Diet will vote on the 4th of October for their next president, who will also likely be elected the next prime minister, as the party holds a minority coalition. Australia has pledged to cut its emissions by 62 to 70% from 2005 levels by 2035. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese unveiled the emission reduction target, emphasising his country's commitment to action on climate change.
It's based upon the science and it's independent advice to the government. But it's also consistent with the European Union have just announced that over the next 24 hours they'll be considering a target range between 63 and 70%. This is ambitious, but it's achievable.
The government has announced more than $3 billion in the so-called Net Zero Fund to help industrial facilities decarbonise. It's committed an additional $1.3 billion to boost the Clean Energy Finance Corporation to continue to drive downward pressure on electricity prices. Australia's greenhouse gas emissions are down by about 27% since 2005. The Climate Change Department had earlier projected emissions to fall by 51% by 2035. Meantime, the EU is scrambling to reach a last-minute solution as the September deadline nears for countries to submit climate plans at a key UN conference in Brazil next week. Environment ministers are meeting in Brussels to break a deadlock driven by internal divisions over plans to fight global warming by 2035 and 2040. Well, Denmark is hoping to get members to agree to a, quote, statement of intent instead. Failure to reach consensus could weaken the EU's climate leadership ahead of COP30 talks in November. The bloc is widely known for its ambitious climate deals, but rising concerns over costs coupled with pressure to spend elsewhere to boost defense and other industries have triggered pushback from some member states. An entrepreneur in Taiwan is bringing the island's historic pride into the future as sustainable materials. Nelson Young's farm-to-material is turning bananas, a fruit the island was once renowned for, into textiles, with the aim of one day creating a shoe made entirely from the natural material.
所以他们2008年，其实欧洲的品牌就跟我们说，他们希望有没有一种就是食物跟材料是在一个平行空间产生，就是这块地同时可以产出食物，也可以产出材料。那我们就是base这种概念下去做，目前我们现在在做的事情。所以我们现在在所有东西的来源一定是食粮、农业或食粮工业的剩余物质，我们去把它转化成材料。
And the firm is doing that by repurposing a banana plant's pseudo-stem, its middle section that's typically discarded when the fruit is harvested. The pseudo-stem gets crushed, then dried, and in the process transforms into fibers that can be made into clothing or footwear. Well, the business is still in its infancy with no orders from apparel companies, but one expert says the material could be a viable textile of the future.
那香蕉纤维在耗水量、吸水性还有供应稳定性都优于一般的棉花，未来应用潜力大。不过，还要打进国际市场的话，还是需要一些像第三方认证啊，还有 LCA 的报告。我们的建议是，它可以建立自己香蕉丝的一个规格标准，还有它也要确立它自己的品质的一致性，还有像是提供一些量化的数据。只要补强这一些，就可以争取更多的品牌的信任跟采用，也可以成为我们台湾在生殖纤维的新亮点。
Well, Cambodia has condemned border clashes between Thai security forces and Cambodian protesters as, quote, an unacceptable breach of its sovereignty. Prime Minister Hun Manet calling it a clear violation of international law. Cambodia reported at least 23 people were injured in the incident, which took place in a village claimed by both sides. According to Cambodian officials, locals had gathered to remove barbed wire fencing laid by Thai forces. They also alleged that the use of smoke bombs and high-frequency sound devices by Thai personnel. Prime Minister Hun Manet said that he has written to his Malaysian counterpart, Anwar Ibrahim, to draw attention to the latest eruption of conflict. ASEAN Chair Malaysia has been a mediator for the two nations, hosting their leaders for truce talks. Thailand, meantime, said that a Cambodian mob had encroached its sovereign territory and damaged official property. The country has issued a statement stressing its officials had exercised utmost restraint throughout the incident. Thai riot control units yesterday used rubber bullets and tear gas to disperse about 200 Cambodian civilians who reportedly threw rocks and other objects at the officers. Indonesia's digital payment app, QRIS, is in a spotlight as the U.S. terms it as a trade barrier. Well, the app is widely used from street stalls to the shops in major malls and is being touted as a way to foster an independent financial ecosystem. CNA's correspondent, Chani Vidvani, with this report.
It's everywhere, from air-conditioned cafes to street-side vendors. The Quick Response Code Indonesia Standard, or what Indonesians know as KRIS, has eased payments for anyone with a bank account.
Pastinya sangat memudahkan transaksi ya, karena kita tidak perlu menyiapkan uang cash dan juga tidak ada minimum payment juga biasanya.
Bagus ya, justru lebih gampang memudahkan buat kita sebagai pembeli sama pedagang juga lebih efektif kan buat ngecek kalau misalkan udah bayar atau belum.
Implemented nationwide in 2020, the system sought to facilitate payment transactions in a more convenient manner, turning cash payments digital and transforming local financial architecture.
You know the process. A consumer can scan a merchant's QR code using their mobile banking or e-wallet app to complete a transaction. The funds will then be transferred from the user's connected account to the merchant's account.
But in a global economic environment where payment systems have become a crucial battleground for influence, Indonesia's KRIS payment system challenges Western financial payment platforms with a localized counter-narrative. So much so that the U.S. recently called out the system for being unfair in a national trade report on foreign trade barriers. Analysts say this signals a new era for Indonesia, presenting the opportunity to explore other partners.
I think it's good for Indonesia's balance of payments. It's also bring more inflow of the money, and for the business itself, whether small enterprise or big corporations can enjoy the QR because they're offering, for instance, less currency risks. Rather than converting to the US dollars, we can convert directly to any local currency as our counterpart.
According to the Indonesian Payment Systems Association, Visa and MasterCard credit card payment systems remain the preferred payment method for cross-border transactions. Credit card transactions in the country grew by 21% last year. The volume of KRIS transactions crossed 6 billion as consumers increasingly chose it for its greater efficiency. Given KRIS's successful run at home, Indonesia has expanded the system overseas, with Indonesians now able to use KRIS in Malaysia, Thailand, and Singapore. There are also plans to expand the service to China, Japan, South Korea, Saudi Arabia, and India. Amid criticism from the US, authorities said that CRIS was created by adopting global standards.
UR Indonesian Standard adalah standar versi Indonesia yang kita adopsi dari standar global. Kedua, didevelop dengan bersama industri, dan ketiga bermanfaat dan sangat bermanfaat untuk digitalisasi masyarakat, khususnya inklusi ekonomi untuk efisiensi dan mendukung kesejahteraan rakyat, dan keempat itu sudah terintegrasi dengan global.
As Indonesia expands CRIS into more markets, analysts note that reducing reliance on Western networks and fostering an independent financial ecosystem in Southeast Asia could unlock greater opportunities for intra-ASEAN and global trade. Chandni Vatwani, CNA, Jakarta.
The European Union has announced a new strategic roadmap with India with the hope of bolstering bilateral ties. The initiative includes a deeper cooperation in a range of areas, including trade, technology, defense and connectivity. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says that the plan aims to strengthen its partnership with India and build upon existing relations. Some EU member states, however, are hesitant over the plan, citing India's purchase of Russian oil as a potential issue. Well, the plan comes at a time of fraying tensions between India and the US amid President Donald Trump's sweeping tariff campaign. Ishan Garg reports from New Delhi for CNA on how India has responded to this strategic roadmap and what it stands to gain.
India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi says that he welcomes the strategic initiative being taken by the European Union. In a post on X, he said that he is also looking forward to welcoming EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen in New Delhi, which could be possibly by early next year. There's also a statement that came out from his office, which again highlighted the importance of India-EU ties. Now, this strategic roadmap that the EU has adopted for India essentially focuses on three key areas, which are connectivity, trade and defense. In terms of connectivity, the roadmap says that both the European Union and India will look at enhancing their connectivity through the Europe-Middle East-Asia Economic Corridor. This is something that was signed in 2023 when India was hosting the G20 countries here. In terms of defense, the EU says that there could be a big partnership in the works here, because on one hand, the European Union is enhancing its own defense production that can be used to supply arms to India, and the idea would be to wean India off of Russian arms. But on the flip side, India is also looking to expand its defense productivity, and in those terms, it could become an export partner to the European Union. And finally, there is the issue of trade. India and European Union are already negotiating a free trade agreement, with the idea being that a deal could be reached by the end of this year.
And that wraps up Thursday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia, and you can always find us on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for watching.